Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this Regional Transport Committee meeting. Repeat that. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this Regional Transport Committee meeting. I'm obligated to read the Chair's statement regarding public recording, which I will now do. And I remind committee members that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded and will be made available on the Bay of Plenty Regional Council website following the meeting and archived for a period of 3 years. For those members of the public here today, all care will be taken to maintain your privacy. However, as a visitor in the public gallery, your presence may be recorded. And by remaining in the public gallery, it is understood your consent is given if your image is inadvertently broadcast. I also remind all present that local government decision-making affords no protection to councillors, council officers and the public for comments made during meetings that are subsequently challenged in a court of law and determined to be slanderous.
And that'll be a good thing for us to continue talking on, because obviously for us as well, there's a danger given how polarising rail is. And
quite a bit of background noise here. Right. In terms of apologies, I'm holding an apology from Helen Rogers of Kiwi Rail. We have no New Zealand Police presence here today, which means we have an apology from Brent Crow. Commissioner Anne Tolley is an apology. Her Worship Judy Turner is an apology. Commissioner Selwood is down in Taupo at the moment. He will be a late arrival and an early departure. He has specifically requested that the issue around Tauriko be discussed, if at all possible, when he joins the Zoom. So we'll play that by ear with your indulgence. And likewise, David, he's very keen to listen to your NZTA presentation. So are there any further apologies, anybody?
Yes, Mary for lateness. She's stuck in traffic.
Yes, noted. So we'll note Mayor Eastwood is stuck in traffic. So I will move that apologies be received. Seconded Councillor Neves. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. There is no public forum at this meeting. In terms of items not on the agenda and late items, there is one which I've accepted from Glenn Crowther with regards to emissions reduction plans. And I'm happy to take that, and we'll have a brief presentation from Glenn at the end of the Chairperson's report. So I'll also call for conflicts of interest. Are there any conflicts of interest, anyone that they feel they need to declare at this particular meeting? Being none, we move on. The minutes of the previous meeting, which was held by Zoom, as we know, on the 15th of March, some time ago. Would someone who was present at that meeting move those as a reasonably true and accurate record of that meeting? Her Worship Mayor Chadwick, Councillor Neves. Are there any matters arising from those minutes?
Yes,
Councillor Neves. Councillor Neves.
Just 3 points. On page 9, it was noted that feedback on the costs of the alternatives to the proposed alignment for Tauriko West were recommended, following the suggestion that it wasn't the cheapest option that was selected. Then a second one was we were advised that there's a judicial review of the NLTP and RLTP processes, and I just wondered if staff had any feedback on that. And lastly, there was a question on page 14 around feedback, requesting feedback on network reliability measures, and I just wondered if we had any response on those. Thank you.
With regards to the judicial review, David, are you in a position to comment from NZTA's perspective to fast track this item? And I'll pass over to Navid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So through you, the judicial review, I'm not, because it's in a judicial review process, except to say that it's underway, it's progressing, there's multiple parties, and as you're aware, the challenges around the extent to which effect is given to, or priorities given to reducing emissions, that will play out for the course of time. In terms of any detail I can provide.
Thanks for that. And I move to the other points that Councillor Lee's raised.
So through the chair, could I just get some clarity in relation to the network review point in particular?
Please, page 14.
Microphone, Councillor Lees.
Page 14 of the minutes. Item for staff follow-up, confirm what network reliability measures were used and how this was calculated in order to better understand the data.
So through the chair, that's still a work in progress, and we'll provide an update to you via email.
Those responses, Councillor Lees.
There was no response on the costs.
It's worship there, Weber.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just remind us of one of the fundamental purposes is to monitor progress against our plans, and note no dashboard at the last meeting, and it doesn't appear to be one for today. How are we going against our major projects, and that, which is a fundamental thing, we seem to, for 3 years, struggle to do that. Thank you.
Rita, just a comment.
So through the chair, we have monitoring as part of our work program. If you would like to see that more frequently, we can certainly update that and bring it to the next meeting.
Well, sorry, supplementary, at the risk of repeating myself regularly for many years, that's a fundamental thing we should be doing. I think it should be on every agenda, but it's no point asking now. I've only got 5 months to go.
Taking it on board, Weber. Okay, the minutes, there's no further questions or comments. The minutes have been moved and seconded. I'll put them. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried.
Aye.
Okay, moving over everyone to page 17, the chairperson's report. I will take that as read. Glenn, would you like to just briefly speak to your paper at this point?
Yeah, I was hoping this would be helpful just to do a quick, basically a copy and paste exercise from a table of actions in the emissions reduction plan. So I know a lot of people have probably looked at parts of that plan, but I'm aware that there's a lot of reading in it, and the table of actions has what I think of as perhaps the more nitty-gritty stuff from an RTC perspective. Some of the shorter term things that the government has committed to in here include, on top of the BKT targets for Tauranga and Rotorua being published, that there will be follow-up work in 23-24 for programs around that, reducing vehicle kilometres travelled in Tier 1, which is Tauranga, and Tier 2 Rotorua areas. And there was also, in the next year, I believe, completed assessments of joint spatial plans and implementation plans for all urban growth partnerships to understand transport emission and funding impacts, and to identify key risks and opportunities for reducing transport emissions. So presumably that's a significant thing for the Smart Growth Partnership to look at. And I've sort of laid out in chronological order. If you look at the document itself, if you haven't already seen it, it's set out more by the particular area, like whether it's public transport or whatever, whereas this summary is sort of put into more of a chronological sequence, so you can see by 2025 there'll be a whole lot of stuff that will come into focus at that point. But I'm happy, if anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to answer it from what I know, but also I'm aware there are others in the room who probably could provide input too.
So, Glenn, everyone in the room has a copy of it, and those who are on Zoom have had it emailed to them. So you've extended an invitation to those individuals to get back to you directly. So thank you for that. Just reverting back to the agenda, Lorraine and Muta. Lorraine, welcome. You've got a presentation you'd like to share with us.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, we have also put together a few slides on the emissions reduction plan, which people will be aware, as Glenn mentioned, came out on Monday this week. It's 340, 350 odd pages, and as Glenn has noted, set out by the sector. So other than the fact that it's new and it came out on Monday, it's not new. It's a long-awaited document, and it can be described as the stake in the sand when it comes to climate change action in New Zealand. It's unique in the sense that it is the first time a whole of government approach to climate change has been reached, and it weaves together all core government departments throughout the plan. Just noting, as I said, it's not new. We previously had exposure to it and input to it from the Bay of Plenty local authorities has been made through the submissions mentioned on the slides, and just to note that they were all joint submissions from the TAs across the region. And on the next slide, I think the key point around it is that the plan is to deliver the first carbon budget 2022 to 2025, and it's 290 megatons of CO2 emissions, and I'm informed by people who know more about it than me that that's about 11 megatons lower than what we would be otherwise. It's, as Glenn has noted, it's a 70-page list of actions, and it's across the sectors, and a total of 300 actions, of which local government involvement or driven. And just to note also that there'll be we're expecting further announcements from the non-carbon budget, the money budget today, to support the carbon emissions. So transport has a major focus in the first budget, and the key focus areas for transport are as set out here: reduce reliance on cars, rapidly adopt low emission vehicles, and begin work now to decarbonise the heavy transport and freight fleet, and support, they call it cross-cutting, but it's sort of, I guess, coordinated approaches to enabling a low emissions transport system. I think a lot of the noise in the media was initially around the item 2, the rapidly adopt low emissions vehicles, but going back to the previous slide, there's that list of actions, which is quite comprehensive. And what that looks like, and this is a fairly complex graph, is it's just showing, which shows the share of potential emissions reductions for each focus area, those 1, 2, 3, 4 on the other slides, the reducing reliance on cars, low emissions vehicles, and the heavy transport and freight, and then what it makes over the budgets, the respective budgets. There's happy to take questions, but please don't ask me about the changes in baselines emissions to 2019, because that's quite complex. It's around where the reductions start based on, in some kind of layman's terms, and I probably got this a bit wrong, where emissions are lower through the COVID period as to what they were pre-COVID in 2019. We still need to look at that a lot more closely to explain that, but otherwise this graph is probably most useful to show kind of how each focus area has more influence in the reduction of emissions over the various budgets. And we will report back in full once we've had a closer look at it. But over the next 4 years, on the next slide, it sort of shows the 1.3 billion to be spent on the transport sector and how that is divvied out. And so if you add up the scrap and the replace and the 61 million to support the bus driver workforce, the transport programs, to get to the 1.3 billion it's all of that 100 to 217 million, for those who are good at and quick at maths, to be announced on budget day, which is today. So it'll be very interesting to see what does come out in there. And I think, and then just to, as I said, we'll report back more comprehensively on this to the next RTC. It only came out on Monday, and it's a bit weighty document, but the key actions to note, the action plans, some of them have been announced and do include activities that were already underway, and some of which were mentioned in another section in the Chair's report on the climate adaptation plan that came out in between these two meetings as well. And there's a short summary in the Chair's report. But yeah, so they are, again, what Glenn mentioned, the subnational VKT reduction targets, reduction programs for major urban areas, of which Tauranga and parts of the Western Bay are Tier 1 and Rotorua is Tier 2, plus the other initiatives that are set out on the slide. And
So we've got, go on, Lorraine.
No, I was just going to say, happy to take any questions. But bearing in mind that
recent ministerial announcements, and it's work in progress. So yeah, so welcome, Commissioner Selwood. Your timing is impeccable, and trust you're not too cold down in Taupo this morning. So questions or comments to Lorraine on behalf of the staff? Her Worship, Mayor Chadwick.
Yeah, thank you for that high level. I think for all of us, we've got to examine it to see that we've got our right targets at our local level, and then have we missed the bus literally on anything in our regional transport plan with the new announcement? And so we haven't analysed it. It was only this week, so we'll have a look at it, see if we're on track. I know today we're talking about the travel demand management paper. That's part of our mode shift work, but I don't know if we've missed anything majorly in our regional approach. And that's what I'd be interested in hearing.
Welcome, Mayor Reestra. Namita, any general comments in terms of the regional land transport plan and light of the ministerial announcements?
So through the Chair, this has literally come out on Monday, so we're all reading through and analysing what it means and what the implications for us are. Staff, did you have any further thoughts on that, Lorraine?
We are still looking through it, but just intuitively, I think there will be some things around the VKTs and the sub-regional VKTs that we might have to, yeah, if we haven't not addressed them, just ensure that they're aligned and they're on track. And yep.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Isles.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Lorraine, for that presentation. Lorraine, just correct me if I'm wrong, I didn't see anything in that presentation that sort of catered for the high deprivation, lower decile communities in our rural district of Whakatane.
Okay.
Yeah, through you, Chair. That wasn't in the presentation. I'm not saying it's not in the document, but because we're still working through it. But as a first cut, the understanding is really that the focus will be through that scrap and replace for low income earning households, and that will be rural or urban. That hasn't been specified.
Yeah, appreciate that. Supplementary, if I may, even that the scrap and replace is going to be beyond the means of a lot of our rural residents. So I'm just sort of airing it as a concern so that we can hopefully look at some other options going forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Lorraine.
So, Namita, in light of the fact that sometime before our next meeting, can you get an initial deep dive analysis on this issue?
Yes, sir.
Out to the whole committee prior to, as soon as you can.
So through the chair, we will review the emissions reduction plan more fully and look at the implications for regional transport committee and get that assessment through to you.
Thank you. Councillor Neves?
Thank you. I wonder if, Lorraine, you could put your slide back on the BKT. Thank you very much. It's just I wasn't quick enough to see that whether that's a shrinking lid, because in an area of growth.
Councillor Neves, just pause one moment.
Which slide? Sorry. Oh, that you had to hit the right one. That was the right one you were on with the BKT targets. Back.
Through you, Chair, I don't think we actually have the VKT targets set out on the slides. That last slide shows the mention of them.
I'm really concerned in an area of growth and where we've got a port that we're expecting a reduction in VKTs. I mean, I think we need to understand this an awful lot more, because we've got a push to electric vehicles, fair and good, that's going to reduce emissions, but it's not going to reduce vehicle kilometres travelled. And in a growth sector, I am really concerned that we need to understand what this may mean for our economy going forward.
So Councillor Neves, just talking to Namuta. Namuta, you might wish to respond. We just agreed to something here to fast track this.
Yeah, so through the chair, we will bring a paper to the next committee meeting, but I do note the next key big action for you is, and one that the Regional Council is considering through its annual plan, is the emissions reduction plan. So it'll be really critical in terms of looking at much more detail in terms of what the entire region needs to do to meet these targets. But we will bring a paper back to you, to the next Regional Transport Committee, with much more analysis.
And an initial response.
Yes.
The next week or so. Lorraine, you wanted to comment?
Through you, Chair, I'd also like to mention that Bay of Connections is looking at specifically the emissions reduction plan from that economic impact on the Bay of Plenty as a region.
We've probably got a number of, but Angus, are you waving at me, or do you want to ask a question?
Just a comment on the rail component of the emissions reductions plan.
Sure.
So we're also working, thank you, Mr. Chair, we're also working our way through the emissions reductions plan as well, but just a key thing to draw people's attention to. So the draft emissions reductions plan last year had a freight emissions reduction by 25% by 2035. This time around, it's much more ambitious at 35%. So a key element of reducing those emissions is obviously around the shift to EVs for road freight, but we can't do it alone. So there's that mode shift element to it as well. And the government has recommitted its commitment to the New Zealand Rail Plan, Rail Network Investment Program as well. So just wanted to acknowledge the support from the RTC for that level of investment previously. So there are other things as well which I'm happy to speak about if you're interested, but I might pick it up with Lorraine if she was interested.
You could cover that as part of your report later in the meeting. Now, we have a number of speakers or people wishing to ask questions. But can I just ask you, Commissioner Selwood, I was happy, as I indicated to you prior to the meeting, to rejig the agenda because of your commitments down in Taupo. Can you just indicate how long you're with us? Because I'm happy to go off this item and go on to the two other matters that you wish to participate in.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be here until 10:30.
Your volume's off. We can't hear you, Commissioner.
Okay. I'm unmuted.
Very faint.
Oh, okay, I'll try speaking up. Is that better?
That's better, yes.
I'm available till 10:30. I'll have to unfortunately leave at that time.
Okay.
Thank you to the
Okay.
of members.
We'll keep it moving. David, you wish to make a comment?
No, thank you. Actually, Angus touched on the exact thing I was going to raise, which was don't forget that rail is part of the solution, and we will need to factor that in.
It's worship near Campbell, then is worship near Weber. Near Campbell.
Thank you, Chair. I, like Councillor Neves, have got some concerns about just how this is all going to transpire, particularly for places like Tauranga. I've been doing a lot of touring around in my new job with my oil burner, and I'm not too sure how I'm going to financially buy my new Tesla to tow a 3-ton boat around the country yet, but that's another issue. But what I'm saying is just this morning, and I guess Mayor Rooster is in the same boat, what's coming into the port of Tauranga here is quite mind-boggling at certain hours, and I know that you people who live here are aware of that, but geez, we've got to be very careful that we don't kill the goose that lays the golden egg here. And I also, like Councillor Isles, who drives a fairly thirsty V8, not sure how I'm going to buy a new Tesla after they've scrapped my V8. So yeah, and that's just for people on a reasonable income, but boy oh boy, somebody that's going to have to be asked to get rid of his 1960 or 1976 Toyota Hilux up in the back blocks of the Eastern Bay, and give them 10 grand to go and buy a nice flash car to tow the horseboat or whatever. I just don't know how it's going to happen. So I'm not knocking it. We know we have to do stuff, but goodness gracious, let's be very, very careful here. Thank you.
Comments, David, Your Worship. His Worship Mayor Webber.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just a little nervous at focusing on vehicle kilometres travelled. What we should be focusing on is emissions reductions. And if you look at what the port's done over the last 50 years with what the transference to rail, the change in vehicles, particularly in the fleet to Euro 5 emissions, we have significantly reduced our emissions in our district. So let's focus on the emissions rather than vehicles, because with the closure of the Port of Auckland and everything coming to Tauranga, that's reducing vehicle kilometres is a nonsense to pursue. You know, it's just not achievable. You're looking at the wrong number. Thank you.
Noted, Your Worship. What I intend to do now, with your indulgence, is park the chairperson's report for reasons I'll explain in a moment. Helen and Sonia are doing presentations on safe journeys and travel safe, and I've just asked the committee clerk to get them to wait, and we'll come back to them. But in light of Commissioner Selwood having to depart at 10:30, and 2 key matters that concern Tauranga in particular, with your indulgence, I will switch to those. So if I can go to page 25 in the agenda, which is the Waka Kotahi New Zealand Transport Agency update. David, are you happy to take it now?
Certainly, Mr. Chair.
Thanks so much.
In the interest of time, what I'll try and do is just hit the high points on this, and we can come back if there's further questions in the report.
We've got Commissioner Selwood till 10:30,
yeah.
So I think just take your time.
Okay. So first things first, can we bring up the presentation, or do I have to do that from here? Yeah. Oh, okay, you want me to drive? Right, pointer.
Just pause for 1 minute. His Worship Mayor Webber, do you want to ask a question?
Sorry, a lazy hand.
No, that's okay. No problem at all. Back to you, David.
Yeah. Oh, you can go, crikey. Now I've flicked through about 300 slides. So hands are just blindly push the buttons. Go all over it. Here we go. Start with this one. So we've talked about this before, but just as by way of an update. So we have been working really hard on a new regulatory funding model. So you'll be aware that some years ago now, we had reasonably significant regulatory failure in Waka Kotahi. Part of the process of reviewing the whys and wherefores of that failure identified that funding, there were some significant issues with how the regulatory system was funded. And we were tasked by government to review the funding model with a view that we would address some of those issues. One of the other issues that, of course, was identified was there was quite a lot of funding being left on the table, so to speak, because of the inefficiencies of the system around what was charged for, what was recovered, and how it was recovered. So the new funding model has been developed. It will mean that our regulatory functions are much more appropriately funded, and more important, well, not as importantly, the right people are paying for the right things. So there's, in the old model, quite a lot of cross-subsidisation occurring, and potentially inappropriate charging of different parts of the sector for cross-subsidisation. So we did meet with councils about this proposal prior to consultation opening. Consultation closed on the 13th of May. We've had a lot of submissions with quite a lot of detail, and that's appropriate because it's actually quite a detailed piece of work, and it's quite important. I guess the key changes here are that we're proposing to change, first of all, operational funding, second of all, road user fees and charges, and thirdly, how the regulatory services are funded in respect of trying to create a standalone funding model for those regulatory services. So in effect, total cost recovery. At the moment, those have been subsidised by the NLTF. The new model will mean that some areas of the sector will pay more, marginally more, for example, for road use charges, marginally more for your warrant fitness, but others will benefit. For example, fees and charges for driver's licensing will drop. You will only pay for a driver's test once. If you fail, you come back and you have another go, and you don't pay again. That was identified as a significant barrier to people getting driver's licenses, for example, particularly in lower socioeconomic areas where the cost of getting a driver's license become prohibitive, in excess of $1,000 in some examples. So those changes have been made in order, one, to encourage behaviours that we want, for example, driver's licenses, but also to make sure that the charges are shooting home to the right places. The other big change is around how the data that is collected on motor vehicle and driver's licence registers can be accessed by commercial users. So currently, commercial users who, one would argue, make a profit or run their business based on having access to that data have not been paying a fair share of the cost of gathering and maintaining that data. That cost is now going to be sheeted home to those commercial users. For those whose business is significantly reliant on that data, those charges can be quite substantial, but they will cost recover those charges. For councils, there's potentially a small cost where you are using that data. But we modelled the effect, and I'm aware that when we spoke to individual councils, we were able to give you the numbers, and they're tiny. They're $1,000 for the likes of any regional council per annum. They're not big, but if you are a very large commercial operator who relies on that data, it's in many thousands of dollars. That feels appropriate. It's one of those examples of cross-subsidisation. I won't carry on with this too much. Suffice to say that I'm aware that Oakland Regional Council did make a submission, Tauranga City made a submission. Those submissions are being worked through at the moment. For the most part, very supportive on first glance. The 30-year baseline plan network version, we've talked about this previously as well. I guess there was the slide is to let you know that that is now operative. It was launched on the 14th of March. You can access it on our website. The goal of the tool is that it's sort of your first port of call when you're looking at your transport system or your transport system plan, for example. And all of the data that you need can be accessed from that site, and it gives us a sort of 30-year view of what the transport system will need to look like based on the current GPS and based on the current policy settings. Now, the really important part is that last statement, because obviously with the emissions reduction plan having landed, very likely that we'll see the GPS updated and being reviewed, and of course what that will do is shift the focus of where some of the work we're doing. Sorry, I forgot to change the slide. Where we are seeing those priorities will change. As we continue to develop the plan, we will continue to work with individual councils on the implications of that plan. But yeah, as I say, there's a link there to the website, and you can have a look at the network baseline plan or baseline version as it stands at the moment. Business case refresh. again, something I've talked to you about before, we embarked on a refresh of our business case process a few months ago now. For my sins, I was asked to sit on the governance committee for that refresh, and it's been an interesting insight into the way that Kotahi does its business, which I thought I understood. The key thing behind this is it's a principles-based approach for developing business cases. It's not a regulatory-based approach, if you like. What we're trying to do is shift away from the here are the rules, computer says no, I'm sorry, you're out, to a principles-based approach to business planning. This is what's the outcome you're trying to achieve? What are the steps we need to do to achieve that outcome? The business case refresh is very strongly informed by feedback from our key stakeholders, and many of you have contributed to the initial survey that we did. The feedback from that was it was an impenetrable system. It wasn't viewed as an impediment to progress, rather than as a tool to ensure that the right investments were being made. It was being used or it was being managed as a compliance tool rather than as a exploratory tool, again, to say, okay, you want to make this investment, is it the right investment in the context of the policy settings and in the outcomes you're trying to achieve, or is there a different way to achieve this, which is the purpose of a business case, right? Not, yes, you got through step 1, now you've got through step 2, now you've got through step 3. And it was also being viewed as simply a way to get a process you had to get through to get your money. And that was internally as well as externally. The feedback from our staff was the same. So we are, I think next week, consultation begins on the proposed changes. I would ask the committee members to have a really good look at it, please, because I think it still needs your input. I think we've made some very positive steps in the right direction, but one, the devil's in the detail, but also two, I think some of those proposed changes need to be tested with our stakeholders. And the reason I say that is, and you will know this inside your own organisation, there are always things you assume, and it's not until you test those with your external stakeholders that you go, oh, okay, it's not quite the way we thought that played out. So please do have a look at that, and if you have any questions, pick up the phone and give me a call. As I say, I've sat through all of the process thus far. New Zealand Upgrade Program. Kaituna North Link, stage 1, and
a slide for that.
Oh, sorry, I keep forgetting. I'm moving on my screen. And obviously components of stage 2, as well as the State Highway 29, State Highway 1 intersection are probably the relevant components for yourselves. One of the things that hasn't been very well advertised, I think, is part of the NZ Upgrade Program. We have launched an employment initiative with the Ministry of Social Development, which was aimed at getting people working on those big NZ Upgrade Program projects that are local and that are where we can from local iwi or hapu, or are small local businesses that could use a bit of a leg up to get to grow their business or get some experience working in large infrastructure projects. It's actually been very, very successful already, and TNL1, we have well over 20 staff now who are long-term unemployed, who are now working on TNL1 in a range of roles, actually, from supervisor roles right down, and those people have got surety of a role for the 5 to 10 year program. We've got one really good news story, which was a local welding company that was a one-man band that was really interested in getting some work in some of these larger projects, but really struggling. As part of the MSD package, he's been able to grow his business. He's now got a very substantial contract doing welding on some of the bridges that are going to go onto TNL stage 1, and the business has grown, I think, something like 400% already. With a view that it will continue to grow, partly because of the surety investment, but partly also because through that program, our very large contractors have been able to offer some peer support and some experience that wouldn't otherwise occur. So it's a really cool program. And TNL stage one is the first of the projects to look at those opportunities. So Māori bilingual signs, he told Huarahi Māori, those we've, as you know, been working for quite some time on changing the signage on our state highways and our roads to enable te reo, to make them multilingual, or bilingual, I should say multilingual. The first of those signs was unveiled in Napier a week ago. The second of those signs, the Kura signs, is going to be unveiled in a few weeks in Whangamarino in Rotorua. Minister of Conservation is coming down for the unveiling. We started with schools because, well, you needed somewhere to start. As we've discussed previously, the rules, the governance around what a road sign can and can't have on it is incredibly detailed. And so it's been quite a process to create some flexibility in that and enable these bilingual signs to be rolled out. And it was felt that, Kura was a really easy, well, it was the easiest and most obvious place to start. The way these will be rolled out currently is that they will be introduced either when new signs are needed, so the old sign needs replacing, we'll replace it with a bilingual sign, or when there's a new sign for a new piece of road or whatever. There are some pretty good international precedents for this, so we haven't met with any significant resistance at all to the idea, and in fact nothing but encouragement. So yeah, look forward to the Rotorua launch event. I will make sure that you're all aware of when that is. Mayor Chadwick, I understand you've already received an invitation to that. Hopefully you'll be there. I'm coming along because I think it'll be a really exciting day, and the Minister's really looking forward to it. So the Minister will be in town for that. We are working now on the next set of signs that will go probably later this year, start to be introduced to the roading network. Land transport rules. So the setting of speed limits rule takes effect today, actually. We've talked about this quite a bit, so I won't spend a lot of time on this, except to say the key things for this are that it introduces the concept of regional speed management planning on a 3-year cycle. That process will be coordinated by the Regional Transport Committee, and there are some implications for us in that, and particularly for Bay Regional Council on this context. As a road controlling authority, you may or may not engage in a regional consultation process. You can do it yourself if you wish to, but you must set a regional speed management plan. And the requirement is that that first of all gives effect to the requirement to reduce speeds at schools by 2027, or at least 40% of schools by 2024, with the completion of that by 2027. The good thing about the speed rule now is that it actually just sets a default. So you really just have to give effect to those defaults. And there's 2 tiers of schools: Tier 1 schools, which will reduce to 40 kilometres an hour, and Tier 2 schools, which will reduce to 60 kilometres an hour, and that's based on whether they're rural or urban. The remainder of that rule is a process you will have to go through this consultation process with communities.
David, just pause for 1 moment. Deputy Mayor Isles.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. No, look, I was just going back to one of David's earlier comments there regarding the Maori bilingual traffic sign rollout to be staged in Rotorua in May. Is there any chance, David, that we could have a similar rollout through in the Eastern Bay? You know, bearing in mind 48% of our population is Maori.
The intent, Deputy Mayor Isles, is that this will be rolled out nationally as those signs require replacing or new signs are produced. And the reason for that is simply a cost and practicality one. So yes, I don't recommend anyone goes and backs over the sign so you can get a new one. Looking across the table here. but we are staging that just from a purely pragmatic point of view. And I don't know I'll be honest, I don't know what the plan is for further rollouts at the moment.
Just keep going, David.
Okay. Speed rule. Back to the speed rule. I probably don't need to speak too much time on more time on the speed rule. I think we've had a pretty reasonable conversation about this. Right, just some quick project updates in the Bay. It's actually been a really busy period in the Bay of Plenty from a delivery point of view. So Tenai Junction funding for construction of roundabout has been approved. That's going to start actually in the next month. Kaituna Northlink Stage 1, as you know, construction is progressing really well there. The construction on the new Wairoa Road Bridge will start at the end of this month. They're making huge progress there. Stage 2, we're continuing to do the investigations into route protection and consenting requirements. One of the challenges with Stage 2 will be that there's quite a lot of freshwater habitat running through there. There's wetlands, there's brackish areas with the marine freshwater interface, and so quite challenging area to go through. So we are having we're taking our time on considering what the route needs to look like from a least impact point of view as we start to get into that process. Taurika for tomorrow engagement starts on Friday. This is about the long-term option for Stato 29. We are proposing that the preferred option long-term is the offline option. And we will also be providing a enabling works update at that consultation as we go. Baylink, you will have seen enormous progress in the last few weeks at Baylink. The new big bridge beams have gone in on the flyover. The Timonga interchange partial opening is scheduled for mid-June, so you'll see a big traffic switcher. We'll have an event there just to mark that. Part of the reason why you're now seeing all of this progress is because of the enormous amount of work that's gone in under the ground at this site. And it's one of the things I keep saying to people is it's very easy to look at Baylink and say, well, I can't see anything happening above the ground. Part of the challenge has been that when we extended the flyover in order to provide the underpass, we actually had to completely redesign the foundations for that piece of work. And the foundation work that's gone in there has been much, much more significant than was designed in the first place. So more than 50% of the work that's gone into that interchange at flyover is actually under the ground and invisible. Regrettably, because some of it's very, very innovative and it's the only place in the country where it's been tried. Te Puke Highway, so we've got works going on at the Kaituna River at the moment. This is about stabilising the riverbank. Regrettably, we've had to close one of the lanes of that road, and the reason for that is that we have to bring in a very large crane to lift the steel reinforcing into place, and the crane has got to be at least 6 metres off the edge of the riverbank for stability reasons. We tried really, really hard not to have to close one of the lanes, but we have had to. In the process of making decisions about timing for this, we got an extension on our resource consent from Bay of Plenty Regional Council, thank you, so that we could delay the works. And the reason we wanted to delay the works was to avoid the peak of the kiwifruit season, because obviously that's a key route for the kiwifruit freight. Unfortunately, because of the weather, the peak of the kiwifruit season also died. And so we're now in a situation where, at least for the next couple of weeks, we will be closing that lane at the same time as we have got peak freight moving through that area. In order to mitigate that, we have decided to do something a little bit innovative, which is to try and redirect western-bound traffic onto the TEL in the evenings. And we may have to look at redirecting eastern-bound traffic in the morning onto the TEL. Obviously, that's a toll road. So what we've also done is we've actually turned the toll off between 4 p.m. and 7 p.m. Monday to Friday, And we've worked really hard with kiwi fruit growers and pack houses and freight companies and the pickers, etc., to communicate that, to encourage them to use TL instead of using Te Puke Highway. That's working with the freight folk and with the pickers. It's not working with the general public. And unfortunately, yesterday, one of our staff, or one of our contractor staff, who was manning the stop go sign, had a bottle thrown at him. And some of those staff had some pretty significant verbal abuse. Somebody threw an apple as well as they drove past out of their car. That's not on. It's not acceptable. So, in as much as we put those guys there in an effort to try and minimise the delays particularly associated with when you have stop go lights because they're done, we are going to go back to stop go lights because we will not put our people at risk of that kind of abuse. What that may mean is that those delays might be worse, but frankly, too bad if people are going to put our staff at risk. That's the consequence. What we will do is trial. We've not done this before, but we will trial having somebody sitting out of sight but nearby in a vehicle with a remote control, and try and remote control the lights, and maybe in the same way as you would with a stop go sign. What we would like from you guys is really encourage people to use the TL because it's free between 4 p.m. and 7 if you're travelling in that western direction. And who knows, some of those people might have such a good experience that they continue to use it once it's not free anymore. We'll be doing that for the next 3 weeks. So you're not a great news story, but we will be doing some more media and trying to do some proactive media around, I guess, identifying that these people you are getting angry with are not the decision makers. They're just good people who are doing their job, and please lay off them.
One stop go guy got murdered over our way a couple of years ago, as we all know, on State Highway 1. So I never ceases to amaze me the venom that people direct to those poor souls. Keep going, David. We've got a time constraint here.
Sorry,
Councillor Neves.
I've got lots of other questions, but I'll keep those. But I just want to know are people getting cross because they are well into their journey before they're told to go back and then get onto the TL?
No, I think it's pretty well advertised, but I think it's human nature, right? I'll give it a go. This is my familiar route. I'll give it a go. It might not be so bad, and then it's 40 minutes. So, and once you're in it, you can't get out of it. I think that's the issue. I also think this is symptomatic of the things you're seeing in supermarkets and things across the country. People are, COVID, cost of living, people are stressed. There's a whole lot of things playing out here. And when you're in a high stress situation, the person you see you can take that out on sometimes is the poor guy or woman standing there with a stop-go sign. I just thought I'd throw this up. This is my last slide, Mr. Chair, just as to offer up a bit of context about the scale of what we have achieved in terms of just maintenance in the Bay of Plenty program. You probably recall when we had the earlier conversations this year that we signalled that we had sufficient funding to maintain the network but not do improvement work. But I also made the point that funding for maintenance is more than we have ever had before. And partly that's a recognition of the fact that the network is slightly larger, but also that costs have gone up. But I just thought this slide just presents you a little bit of scale, if you like, and maybe explains why there's been a fair bit of disruption over the summer period. We've also had an extended summer period. So we're still sealing now because ground temperatures are high enough that you can put seal down, which is incredible. The guys tell me they can't remember a season where we've been sealing right into May. So I won't work through it, but just provide you a fair bit of context.
Okay, thanks, David. Deputy Mayor Isles.
Mr. Chair, David, just out of interest, David, what's the difference between resurfacing and resealing?
So one is asphalt. So resurfacing asphalt, 7.6 kilometres, resealing using chip seal is 361 kilometres. So as you know, asphalt's smoother, it's quieter, it's also significantly more expensive. And when you resurface with asphalt, you have to do quite a lot more basement work to the road, whereas when you're resealing with chip seal, it's you've got old sprockets and tar and throw the, I mean, it's not that simple, and the maintenance guys will kick me for saying that, but it's a simpler, easier process, it's cheaper.
Thank you, Dave.
Commissioner sorry, Deputy Mayor Isles, you have a supplementary there.
Just apologising there, my eyesight wouldn't allow me to see that very small font underneath the resurfacing and the resealing.
Right, if I take my glasses off, I can't read it either.
Your Worship, Mayor Reestra, then Commissioner Selwood.
Thank you. I'd like to go back to probably the first thing you covered in your presentation, because I felt like we'd had an early Christmas present in our district. You mentioned that the licence fees for car licences would be dropping or lowering somewhat. My question is when, because that will determine quite a bit of our budgeting for mayoral task force for jobs, and also our quite extensive council-led licensing program we run in our district.
So it takes effect today.
And thank you for the Christmas present.
Consultation closed. Oh, so I can't tell you when it takes effect yet. We're still going through the consultation. We're still going through the submissions process, but the effect of it will be, for example, you will pay once, and if you fail, you don't pay again. The reset fees will go. So that was identified as a really, really significant barrier, and what we were finding was a lot of young folk would come, sit, pay the fee, sit it, fail, and then go, oh, well,
I have my own stories around that.
Yeah, I'm just going to keep driving without a driver's license because I can't afford the reset fees and the reset fees and the reset fees, right? So one fee, you pay once, that's it. The fee is slightly lower, so it's not spectacularly lower, but it's slightly lower. And the intent is that kind of discouragement, that financial impediment is removed.
Supplementary, please, Chair. Would that be at the start of the new financial year?
The intent is to implement that as soon as possible.
Commissioner Selwood, before I go to you, just to let you know in terms of you planning your time, we've got the variations team sitting in the waiting room as I speak. So after this is finished, we'll swing straight into the variations. So to you, Commissioner Selwood, then to Worship Mayor Chadwick.
Thank you very much, Chair. I really just wanted to underline the criticality of submissions back on the business case review that is underway. This is a major issue for us, particularly in the region where we have an agreed spatial plan through smart growth, and agreed and signed by the partners transport systems program in the context of connected centres and UFTI. We have a partnership already in place, and I find it frustrating, and so does the council, that we so often on these projects have to go back to the start point of a point of entry, an indicative business case, and then a detailed business case process. We already have the strategic case in place, and I am hoping that having these strategic alignments actually has some credibility in the business case process, and that the amendments that come through recognise that, so that we can expedite the process. Not that we want to take shortcuts, but we know where we're going, we know the outcomes we want to achieve, and we know why we need to get closer to the point of action. And if you look at our current regional land transport plan, much of the funding is for business cases rather than project delivery. So I think this is a critical item. I just wanted to make that point. Thanks, Chair.
Worship Mayor Chadwick, then Councillor Nees. Mayor Chadwick.
Thank you, David. And if I can just mention and acknowledge here Hawea Verco, who died in 2014, and his dad, Waka Verco, was cultural advisor to Regional Council. Hawea drove a bus with a sign Kura on the back, and that was the beginning of our lobbying central government to get bilingual signage. So good things come 8 years later. A fantastic initiative, small but hugely significant to us and will be to the wider rohi. So if I can just acknowledge how thrilled Waka and Lynn will be about this movement, and it would be lovely if they're invited. And the other, thank you, David, for your update to Rotorua Lakes Council. It's quite good when we get a chance to just talk about our issues, as well as looking at the connectivity to the wider region. And the last issue is an aggregate trial that was used using recycled tyres by Tuhoi on roading surfaces. I wonder if we are looking at the circular economy and the use of other aggregates.
So just two things there. Mayor Chadwick, would you mind sending me the contact details of those people so I can ensure that they are invited?
Will do.
That would be, I'd be grateful. Circular economy, alternative surfaces, yes. So we're actually working quite closely with Tuhoi on their green road concept and on how we might give that a trial. We have a facility down in Palmerston North where we can actually literally build a road and run a bunch of scenarios, tyres and all sorts of things over it and stress test it and destroy it and see how long it lasts. So we are actually working in that space quite a lot.
Great, thank you. That has potential.
Sorry. Commissioner Selwood, is your hand still up, or have you got a supplementary, or before I go to Councillor Lees?
It is, thank you. I do apologise, I'm going to have to go. I wonder if I could just have a few words on the next item. We're going to be real quick, so just stay glued to your seat there. Hold on a minute, Councillor Lees.
Sorry, just a couple of minor matters. The regulatory review, where councils are going to have to pay for access to licence data. Really aware that many councils actually use number plate systems where you put your number plate data in, and that's the whole way that then people get penalised for not meeting parking. So the way that it's going to work is it going to have to pay every time they go in and check a licence, or do they pay to get a dump of the licence database?
I can't answer that level of detail, except I'm pretty sure when Kane answered this question the other day, he said it's an aggregate charge at the end of the year, but I don't know. I know that some councils actually do offer remissions for parking fees if people go and get their car licence. And I just ask that you look at that as a quid pro quo, because the TLA is actually doing your job by saying if you go and get your licence renewed by this time, then we will waive your parking fines. I know that used to happen when I was at GCC. I don't know whether it still does, but you know, there is a quid pro quo. The other thing is about the business case review. Is our RAG going to be submitting on that as a group, or are we all going to do our separate submissions?
Is it to James or someone when they come on board?
So through the chair, when the team come on board, we'll talk to that item.
Okay, thank you. The only other issue, or there's two issues. One's the bilingual signs. Are the signs going to get bigger to accommodate the Maori and the English words? Because I do believe we still will need English words because we have foreign drivers and they've got a chance of understanding English, but not a chance often of understanding Maori. So I think legibility of the signs is really important. So will signs get bigger to accommodate the two language?
So in the presentation, there was a picture of the Kuta sign, which you can see on the screen. So the text has been maintained the same. So the actual physical dimensions of the sign increase in order to accommodate the text.
And the only other thing, sorry, just around the school changes for speed for schools, I was a little bit concerned because you have Category 1 schools and Category 2 schools. Category 1 schools, which are in 50-kilometre areas, have a 30 k's fixed with variable speed limit, or 40 if they're in place prior. I know many rural schools that are in areas with 60 to 80 kilometre speed limits that have actually got 40 kilometre speed limits currently. It's because of the curves, etc. And I would hate to think that those schools are going to have to go up to a 60 kilometre speed limit, because that would be
no. This is about bringing the speed limits down at those schools. So if they're already at 40 kilometre, I'll double check that, but I'm pretty sure that if they're already in place, they'd stay.
Okay, we need to move on quickly. I'll just make a commitment on behalf of the Regional Transport Committee that we'll get our comms team to work in closely with those issues that you're encountering, and we'll work with TCC, Western Bay, with your lollipop issues. All right, David? You just moved the seat of your report. I'll second it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carry. Everyone flick over quickly to page 33. Commissioner Selwood, you specifically wanted to be present for this. We've accommodated you accordingly. Andrew, you're in the waiting room, as is Tom McIntyre from TCC, I gather.
Yes,
and
so
can you keep, it's very much a formality, this, so most of the other entities have all processed it. Can you keep it pretty short and sweet?
Yeah,
thanks.
Very brief. I understand Commissioner Selwood needs to leave. So in summary, the committee has received a variation from TCC to vary the Taraka West detailed business case. It's to enable a property phase to be added to the RLTP and to support the existing phases of that activity which are already in the RLTP. The property phase is now required as the final road route is known but was not at the time the RLTP was adopted or submitted. It's valued at approximately 29 billion and is therefore determined to be a significant variation to the RLTP. However, as noted in the report, there's a number of mitigating factors which support approving the variation as non-significant. They include extensive consultation already undertaken by TCC, the inclusion of the activity in the RLTP, agreement from the Regional Advisory Group, and the Waka board has endorsed the property phase and associated funding allocation. So I'll hand over to questions now and note that Tom McIntyre from TCC is also on hand to support answering any questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much. Commissioner Selwood.
Thank you.
Your Worship, Mayor Chadwick.
Just a very quick comment to endorse this and underline the criticality from the provision of housing perspective. This will unlock Tauriko West 2,000 initially and 4,000 into the future. It also unlocks the investment by Triangle Order in terms of social and affordable housing, and it's a step towards the major offline project that we hope to accelerate into the future. So given the criticality to TCC, I'll hand over to my colleague to address any technical aspects. And very happy to support this motion, record my vote in support. And with that, we'll have to depart with haste.
You may just wish to hear the Commissioner, Her Worship Mayor Chadwick.
Yeah, thank you. And just looking at the material impact on other projects that are underway, because we've all got major housing critical issues, and for us, it's the Nongataha Pies Pa Road. So is this a new mechanism that we raise a variation, and does that change priorities that we've been bidding for by business cases for many years? That's just what is the impact on the wider region? We understand the need for housing. We understand where Tauronga's going, but we all have housing needs linked to Kāinga Ora, linked to roading. How do we jiggle the material impact on the priorities that we agreed?
Andrew or James? James, are you there in the room somewhere? Either one of you, can you respond to Her Worship?
Yeah, sure.
James,
Through the chair, this activity was included at number 4 of 61 within the RLTP. So it has been engaged on, and for any funding for other activities that they need to be in the RLTP, so whether that's the current RLTP or the next one. With respect to the funding allocation, Kotahi may be able to support me, but I understand that the majority of this funding will actually come from Kotahi. So if this activity wasn't actually in the RLTP, the funding wouldn't be coming to the region.
So it doesn't, I think my question is, does it bump down other priorities, that are major for us? One that has been planned for a long time, everyone knows it, we all harp on about it. But where do they sit in the scheme of things when this wedge comes in?
I don't believe it does do that. Mayor Chadwick. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, is Worship Mayor Webber? Like we've lost you.
No,
you're
sorry,
back.
I'm back. Yes, I fully support what's looking there. I think what we need to actually take a long, hard look at ourselves and say, this is what we get when we focus on emissions and not on roading to meet the housing needs of our community. And you know, I go back to the priorities that I wanted. That was you know, bypassed, and this is the unintended consequence of not focusing on the right things. Thank you.
Okay, are there any further speakers? Your Worship, David, do you want to comment?
I might just respond to that question about funding. There is no money printing machine. So yes, there is a reallocation of projects that occurs as a consequence of this, but it's a reallocation across the whole NLTP. That's just the reality. When things cost more, we have to reallocate. It's not necessarily out of the Bay of Plenty. It's across the priority list of the entire NLTP.
So, Your Worship, Mayor Webber, there's 3 recommendations on page 34. Are you happy to move? Yep. And is there a seconder, Councillor Neves? It's been moved and seconded. I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carry. And thank you, everyone, and in particular for your indulgence with regards trying to accommodate Commissioner Selwood on those 2 particular items. I believe he has already gone. So we've dealt with Waka Kotahi and we've, sorry. Yes, Glenn.
Just thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to raise the issue of the considerations for this agenda item. So I wasn't speaking to the item that just had the vote specifically, but to the context of it. And it's certainly not pointed at Andrew or any particular issue around what the staff did. But I noticed as the Environmental Sustainability Advisor that those considerations include climate change and often have what I would call a fairly generalistic kind of approach. And I'm trying to understand in terms of giving advice where this needs to be sitting. And I guess I'd appreciate input from the staff, from Andrew or Lorraine, because in this particular project, as Mayor Webber quite rightly said, there is a tension between the emissions side of things and, as David said, the funding, and then the enabling of housing. And you know, it's one thing to sort of point out the positive aspects from climate change, but it misses the point in my view. But I mean, the point is that this is acknowledged by councils and NZTA, by Waka Kotahi, as a project that will increase emissions, that will not be good for environmental impacts overall. And the next NLTF requires, and I'll just read, new investments for transport projects to demonstrate how they will contribute to emission reduction objectives and establish a high threshold for new investments to expand roads, etc. So that may change if there's a government change, of course, but I'm just trying to get an understanding of, with those considerations, to me, to talk about, you know, it'll be great for Tauranga because we'll get expansion of walking and cycling. It's a bit like saying that, you know, the Russian invasion of Ukraine is good because people will get to travel more. It's missing the point. The point is that this will lead to massive increase in emissions in Tauranga. And there is a tension there and it needs to be openly acknowledged. Now, I'm not sure, as your advisor, whether that's the right place to do it, but I've noticed very closely on this project that there has been nowhere where that has been publicly acknowledged. It's privately acknowledged very openly by all the parties involved. But I think that's what I'm suggesting, that if it's not acknowledged here, when will it be acknowledged? But more importantly, if this project doesn't trigger that climate change consideration in a very, you know, as an orange alert or red alert, what project will? This is the single biggest contributor to increases in carbon emissions in Tauranga.
Totally agree, and I've just had a discussion with Namuta and she's keen to have a conversation with you over the morning tea break. Okay, Councillor Neves, and then we're going to adjourn for morning tea. Councillor Neves.
Just a comment. This is an example one of the frustrations that we deal with, where we have so many national policy instruments and they're all overlapping and conflicting. And the NPS urban development is driving for new houses. And we've got the NPS freshwater, which has got provisions around wetlands, etc., and that's providing issues around planning roads, for example, for the TNL2. So we're dealing with all of these conflicts, and until the government actually pulls it all together and develops a hierarchy and gives us a pathway through, we can only do our best. And I have been party to conversations where we've been talking in the regional council about getting public transport in from this development as soon as we can. So that's the carbon emission reduction component that's missing from the conversation that we just had as a result of bringing in this variation. But part of the funding, I'm sure, from Waka to Kotahi will be contingent on the fact that there is public transport that is available right from the beginning.
Okay. I intend to take a break for morning tea, and we'll reconvene at 11 o'clock. And as I said, we're going backwards in the agenda, so when we come back, we'll go back to page 22 and tidy up the chairperson's report. So we'll adjourn until 11 o'clock, everyone.
Everyone.
Welcome back, everybody. Lorraine, you had an extra item there you wanted to share with the members on the infrastructure acceleration. Just a very brief update. Are you there, Lorraine? Would you like to? Floor's yours if you can.
I'm here, thank you. Through you, Chair, just at a request from one of the members, we've prepared a quick brief update on the status of the IAF applications that the RTC wrote in support of at the end of last year, beginning of this year. So in the case of Opotiki District Council, quite a sensitive stage, I guess, of the negotiations, and a public statement will be provided soon. For Tauranga City Council, the TCC made applications, 4 applications, and TCC has been notified that 2 have been approved in principle subject to negotiation, and they are for Tauriko West and for Te Papa. For the Western Bay of Plenty, that their application for roading improvements at the intersection of State Highway 2 and Omoka Road has progressed to the next stage. And for Rotorua Lakes Council, they are through to the negotiation stage on their request for stormwater infrastructure, which will support the transport infrastructure to enable housing intensification. And that's fairly much
Thanks, Lorraine. That was for information, everybody. Just moving on, we have 2 ladies in the waiting room. Helen and Sonia, are you there?
Yes, I certainly am.
Helen? Okay, Helen, firstly, our humble apologies from everyone on the committee, but we had to rejig the agenda to accommodate one of our members on a couple of critical matters. So sorry it's taken you so long, and but we're delighted to have you here and looking forward to what you have to say. So floor's yours.
Thank you. Morena tātou, can you see me?
Not yet, and we're on page 22.
Sorry, there I am. Morena tātou, ko Helen Van Beek, Aho, Rotorua Lakes Council, Safer Journeys Coordinator. I'm responsible for running the road safety programs, which include targeted programs for younger drivers here in Rotorua. And I'm here to speak to you today about Driver Directions, our practical driving program for youth on their learners or restricted licence. Firstly, a bit of history. Driver Directions evolved from the Rotary Young Driver Awareness course, which back in the day was purely theory-based. Then 10 years ago, Rotorua Lakes Council and Taupo District Council received funding from Waka Kotahi to target this at-risk age group. As Taupo had a racetrack, it made sense to work in partnership, and driver directions was developed. Back then, the youth from Rotorua would travel down to Taupo with their parents, until 4 years ago, that is, when Taupo decided to spend their funding elsewhere. And we came into our own as we didn't want to lose this valuable program. So we set it up to run at the International Kart Sport track up in Mamaku, which has since been built. We're fortunate that they see the value of this program and provide the venue free of charge. We hold 7 one-day courses a year and still work really closely with Rotary, who supply us with great volunteers who are really passionate about road safety. The police here also play a huge part with the importance of teaching our youth in a safe environment and where they're not afraid to ask questions. The courses are held in the school holidays, and we have up to 25 young adults come with their parent or caregiver who is teaching them to drive. They drive the vehicle they are learning in, and we even teach them the basics like vehicle maintenance, pumping up tyres, as well as the important skills, reversing. Don't just rely on that camera. You can't see a little kid behind that. Sometimes parallel parking, following distances, teaching how to kick in the ABS brakes. They really like that one. They drive with qualified driving instructors. We also get them to sit on a bike and get someone to drive past, and they can see what it feels like to be on a bicycle and how it feels with the vehicle travelling quite fast to only be 1.5 metres away. So they know what it's like for that person on the bike. Also, they climb into a truck and see what the truck driver cannot see. Also, the police drive around the racetrack behind them. They'll often put on their lights, and some of them are totally oblivious to it until the siren sounds. And that's a really good lesson for them of being aware of everything around them and not just the radio playing. So we've got a little video that we've produced to show people what to expect, and also to try and encourage more people to come and volunteer. So if you wouldn't mind just showing that now for us, Amanda, thanks.
Hi, welcome to Driver Directions. We're held at the Mamaku track here. It's a wonderful experience for the younger drivers, especially those that are very new to driving on their learners, and beneficial to those with the restricted licence just before they go for their full licence. The important thing about this program is it's free.
So I think that the course today provided a lot of opportunities for us, and like opportunities that you wouldn't typically get from just driving with your guardian or with a driving instructor.
I think it benefited me a lot. I learned from it, and also like the parallel parking and
I was actually really nervous to come here today, but I think it's really improved my driving skills a lot, especially helped me to become more confident.
go, middle, go, brake.
there's all our great sponsors there. Gives you a bit of an overview. Some of you may have recognised the person in the vehicle there. That's if you haven't been to Guido's Bakery, you should go. That's the lovely Guido with the son there. So they were coming up and I managed to convene to be our models. And it was interesting that last shot where they kicked in the ABS brakes, you could see what came from the boot of his car came forward into the front of the vehicle. So that was a really good lesson of what can come and hit you from behind. So just stuff like that they learn. And it's just great. I love it when I see the kids come really nervous at the start of the day, and by the end of the day, they're all smiling and looking really confident. So last year, even with COVID at play, we still managed to get 127 youth through the program, and some of the feedback was great to get support and driving advice from a different voice rather than the parent, and hugely appreciated that it was free also. Fabulous instructors, well-run course, and wish all new drivers could access this nationwide. So driver directions is not a one-off. We've got youth come back to repeat the course until they feel confident, as the recommendation is 120 hours of driving practice and prior to sitting your licence. And we also start the learning process early with our youth here in Rotorua by holding a road safety youth expo annually. So I'm busy working on that. It got postponed from March and it's happening at the end of June here for us. So all the high schools, kura, alternative education providers bring their year 11 students to a 2.5-hour workshop. And again, the police, fire and emergency, Higgins, ambulance, driving instructors and others getting into these young people's brains the effect that one bad decision can have on the road can have, I say. So it's prior to them getting behind the wheel at year 11. So we're trying to just get them to, get the message to their friends and not be afraid to speak out. And we generally have around 800 students attending a year. So that's just one of the programs that I do. Has anyone got any questions?
Okay, questions or comments?
Yeah.
Yeah, Chadwick, is that a hand going up? Or?
It is. Thank you. I just want to say thanks, Helen. This is a fantastic initiative and also supported by volunteers and service groups. And it is something that we initiated through Mayor's Task Force for Jobs. And I get incredible feedback from our Youth Centre Trust and our young rangatahi about how helpful this is for them. So thanks for your work there. Proud that you came today.
Yeah, it was the first for me presenting, so thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, and apologies again for bringing you on so late.
No worries.
Thank you. Sonia, are you there? Welcome, and apologies to you too for the late start. So over
just
to
trying
you.
to press all the right buttons. You got that screen up there? Yep.
Yes.
Well, tēnā koutou katoa, kei te mihi o te rā kia koutou. Good morning, mayors, councillors, commissioners and senior transport staff. I'm Sonia Linds, the team leader of the Travel Safe team, and I'm enjoying seeing some familiar faces because I previously worked regionally. I'm presenting on behalf of our Western Bay Road Safety this morning, and I follow my Rotorua colleague who had a fancy video. So in my PowerPoint today, I've just put up some photos for you to see some of our actions. Travel Safe team works across Tauranga City and Western Bay of Plenty District Council regions to promote road safety and to encourage active travel. We're very operational on the ground out there in the community, so I'll try and keep it high level today, but share some of our experiences. We really value collaboration, and we're still part of the Operational Joint Road Safety Committee here in the Western Bay, so collaborate closely with our Tauranga City and Western Bay District Council traffic safety engineers, Bay of Plenty Regional Council, Waka, Kotahi, Police and ACC within that group. Our promotions for people aged 0 to 100. However, we do have some higher focus on young people, cyclists and vulnerable road and footpath users. I was going to go into a little bit of detail about what we do in our young driver workshop. Get my slides going here. But very similar, but not the same. We always do things slightly differently in our regions to Helen's presentation there. So we do young driver workshops. We do 2 days of these in each school holidays. October, we saw 56 students. And just recently, at the end of April, we had 48 students go through this. We cover the topics of driver behaviour, so restraints, impairment, distraction and speed. We cover a practical lesson, and we really encourage their parent or caregiver, whoever is teaching them to drive, to come and be part of that too, so that they can carry on with some of that education. We've been really privileged to have McFall Fuels supporting us to bring their truck along. So we do the heavy vehicle education and awareness. And in that photo there, you can see Jamie from Waka, Kotahi, giving a practical mechanical session, as well as talking about vehicle safety ratings. We introduce them to the Drive app so that they've got something to go on with afterwards when they get home. Teaching them how to drive safely near cyclists, as well as driving safely near railway. This is one of the children sitting in the truck. Not children, youth. I've been in trouble. We have a very big focus in the schools. Our relationship with the schools is very important to us, as we believe that children, if we get the good road safety habits within our schools and our children, then hopefully they're going to take those good road safety habits through to adulthood. Evidence also suggests that multiple education opportunities for road safety across the ages will have more impact than one-off opportunities. So we do different things. You see Ruben the road safety there that we do with the littlies from early childhood and junior. We've got some, there was some new infrastructure there near one of the intermediates. So we did some training with that intermediate on how to use the bi-directional pathway. We have student groups in the schools. Kids Can Ride cycling program, which is for year 5 and 6s, and thankfully through term 1. I thought I was going to have to cancel it, but we only had 2 schools pull out through term 1, which was just amazing. So we run an intermediate cycling program, which is when new students head off to a new school, we help them with the safest route to and from home to school, to try to encourage them to carry on cycling, but to choose the safest route. Secondary school, we work closely with the SAD group, Student Against Dangerous Driving. We've been trialling some motorcycle education in the secondary schools. We still haven't come up with the absolute amazing formula there yet, but we're about to try something else there. I've been working with ACC and Pastmasters on that. As well as that, just constant newsletters each term with the schools to keep road safety top of mind. We get many concerns around congestion near our schools, and this is where road safety and active travel go hand in hand, because parents are reluctant to send their children walking and cycling if there is poor road safety or parking behaviour outside their school. Cycling, we have a big focus on cycling here. Sorry, that other photo was out from one of the Orange Days, where we actually thank, just going back to school, thank the 700 plus children, volunteers that are out there being road patrollers, bus monitors or travel safe students, because they do such a great job for road safety in our community. We put a big focus on cyclists because we have had feedback, obviously, in past reports that the safety and perceived safety of cycling puts a lot of people off. So we have the Kids Can Ride program in the schools. We have an adult cycling coordinator who runs group riding sessions to teach people how to safely lead groups on the road. Blind zone training, you can see this picture on the screen of one of our blind zone trainings last year that we held at the marina, teaching cyclists how to safely cycle near heavy vehicles, as we have a large percentage of heavy vehicles here. Mentoring some of the community cycle groups. Some of these groups have up to 160 members, so we have a continual mentoring program where our adult cycling coordinator just joins the groups regularly to support the leaders there in good road safety practices, as well as adult cycle skill education training opportunities for beginner, intermediate and advanced. And one other thing that we do is some themed rides, which might bring a different population that isn't thinking about cycle education. So we've done some historical rides, learning about Māori history, where people come along for that reason, but we actually sneak in some good cycle education while they're there. So it brings a different part of the community that didn't know they were going to get some cycle education along the way. This photo here is just from last night, actually. We're out there at the moment doing some Be Bright sessions. Tell me to stop if you're running out of time. We use our funding for advertising. We have a few city billboards. We have a Facebook page. We pay for different ads on the radio at different times. You might have heard a recent one around sharing with care on some of our pathways, trying to get our e-bike users to slow down and use their bells or call out when they're coming, and trying to get our pedestrians to move over to the left so that they can share those pathways together. Coming up tomorrow, we've got the combined intermediate school workshop, so many of the road safety students and teachers coming to that. 2 primary school workshops next week, winter pit stops, so encouraging the twirl checks in one of our shopping centres. The words went from me. Continue with Be Bright. Encouraging workplaces to think through about how they travel and using alternative modes. We're really pleased to have Wayne Hunter in the role of road policing, who's now going to be in there for 3 years, because we've had a few changes in that role, so it's been hard to have a consistent police input. So due to that, we're starting up soon some child restraint roadside stops. And also externally, we support Age Concern to deliver mobility scooter workshops, car fit workshops for older adults. When we can, we support Ngāti Kahu, who deliver recidivist driving. We just support them with a bigger building when their numbers grow. And I'll leave it at that. If there's any questions.
Any questions or comments? Members to Sonia? Councillor Needs.
Well, firstly, I just want to acknowledge and thank you for all the wonderful work that you're doing. The programs look like huge fun, and I wish I had access to those when I was needing them. But the question that I would like to ask is, in your groups, do you discuss the issue of boy races? I ask this because I live in the Western Bay, and it seems to be a problem that is getting worse. Some of the rural roads around where I live, they're actually black with tyre marks. And this activity occurs near blind corners on hills. And unfortunately, it's starting to happen even during the day. It used to be at midnight. And it was only the people that lived next door to it that got really annoyed by the screeching of the tyres. But I happened to be 2 instances on a walk within the last month where, on a very steep hill with corners either end, somebody turned up, started spinning his wheels until there was so much smoke you could not see across the gully, and then he let go and was snaking all over the road, and I'm standing there on the side of the road with my dog. Now, obviously, he's doing it for the thrills, but he doesn't seem to care. It was different cars, different drivers. They don't seem to care that they're putting their own lives at risk, but they're also putting the lives of other people's animals, people and property at risk also. And I just wonder if there is a strategy, whether you are working with police, because I know that we've tried to get the police up to address this, and it doesn't seem to have any traction.
Long question.
I think that's, if you've heard my excitement about having a consistent road policing person in our area, that's one of the reasons why, is we've started a lot more communication back and forth around these things. And while I haven't got an instant answer to that, because they do sometimes work together and appear, this is what police have told me, they appear at different places, so it's hard to actually know when they're going to suddenly do this. That communication has increased between ourselves and and police to try and understand when these things are happening. As well as during our young driver workshops, we just really push for the safety and just show the impacts of what they're driving on the road does for all the other road users. But that's not going to fix that problem, but definitely having a better relationship and a consistent person in the policing road policing role is hopefully going to help that.
This proves the point of having the police at our meetings to hear these concerns. Well, thank you, Sonia, and very, very good. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that was the chairperson's report that started at 9:35. So I will move it. Seconded Councillor Mees. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Oh, sorry, Councillor.
Sorry,
Mees.
I just
Another long question.
number. Sorry, I was holding my powder for the Commissioner Selwood. The National Adaptation Plan. Are we going to be submitting on that? It is a consultation document, but I'm really concerned about our vulnerable infrastructure. I keep on hearing the Minister of Transport saying that there's going to be less investment in roads in the future and more investment in PT, but I think that climate change is going to require a lot more maintenance funding. We've only got to look at the recent floods that we've been seeing around the country where roads and bridges are washed out. And I do think in the future we're going to have to look at funding alternative routes where existing routes become no longer viable. So I guess my question to David is there a national inventory of at-risk roads that will have to be had additional work done on them or additional routes built around them within this adaptation plan?
The really short answer is yes. And the complex answer is there are a whole bunch of elements that make those roads priorities or not priorities, and the different interventions are being worked through at the moment. So Stairway 25, for example, on Coromandel was a really good example. Stairway 2, obviously along the coast. Those are really good examples where sea level rise, storm damage, etc. There's relatively low level of resilience. There's a relatively limited ability to move those roads. So while the minister's comment, you've got to kind of take that in context. The reference to that was a reference to new roads as opposed to maintaining existing roading network. This adaptation plan is very much about steering what maintenance of the existing transport network looks like. So yes, there is, and yes, there is a list of priorities. It needs testing and it needs constant updating, obviously, as things occur. Thames Coromandel District Council have done a really good shoreline management plan. They've gone through quite an extensive community consultation process, and we were very heavily involved in that with them. And as you might imagine, substantially that actually addressed many of the issues of State Highway 25 and 25A, because for them it's a critical piece of infrastructure. So we kind of piggybacked on the process, which was really nice. But yeah, that's a good example if you want to have a look at that of the issues they're raising. They don't necessarily raise solutions, but clearly that's the next phase of that adaptation plan.
So Namuta.
Just through the chair, just to confirm, Regional Councillor drafting a submission on the National Adaptation Plan, and certainly keen to understand if there's interest from the Regional Transport Committee in doing something jointly together as well. Certainly we can work with respective organisations to do that.
Thank you. And just one final comment about the proposed new timetable that's being worked on for the RLTP. Looks great as long as there's a Labor government re-elected. It's not going to work at all if we get a national government, because we'll have exactly the same problem that we've had previously, because it assumes that the government's going to come in, endorse the GPS that was already in place, and we're going to go, whoopee, and here's our regional transport plan. There is huge risk in that if we get a different colour government or a different coalition government and the GPS becomes reworked, we are still going to be back at the same problem. So I just sort of wish there'd be two versions for election A and election B. But anyway, that'd be great, but I don't think it's going to be that.
Yeah, Chadwick, you were about to have kittens there, I think.
Oh, look, I think we carry on with business as usual. I get your point, Jane, but I think it takes a long time for any changes to be implemented at the deep level of granularity, and I think we must do a submission back, and that shows the strength of the Regional Transport Committee too.
Thanks, Your Worship. Okay, we need to move on. Your time is valuable, everyone that's at the table. Can we just pause for a couple of minutes while I ask you to go over to page 44? We'll ask the staff to come into the room, and Amanda's going to put up some alternative recommendations for us. Yes, we have. Yeah. We'll certainly put the chairperson's report to bed. Okay, so when we're ready to go. James? Everyone ready to go? Welcome, James. Floor's yours. I know you wanted to take a lot of this as read, which we're happy to do, but if you think your PowerPoint presentation is informative and needs to be shared with the committee, please take up that invitation.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. So I will just very, very briefly summarise the intent of the travel demand management work, which is essentially to try and work out how we can start the process of understanding how people travel now, particularly when they use single occupancy private cars, and what we might be able to do in the future to persuade them to use alternative modes of travel, at least for some journeys. And TDM essentially is all about hearts and minds and understanding people's needs in a variety of contexts, and that could be geographic, it could be social, could be cultural, all those sorts of things. And TDM is very much supportive of infrastructure investments and service delivery. So, for example, where councils put in new cycling infrastructure, TDM, is able to support getting more people onto bikes and ensuring that infrastructure is then well used. Similarly with bus services, where regional council improves or introduces services, TDM can help actually get more bums on those bus seats. So it's really important for the whole of the programme that we have across the region that TDM is seen as an integral activity that we undertake. And the purpose of the scoping studies essentially is to set out what could be undertaken, and of course all of this is subject to agreement around prioritisation and funding. So the purpose of the revised recommendations is to make it very clear that at the moment none of this represents a financial commitment, because all of the partners at council and national level indeed need to work out where funding may come from to deliver a range of different measures. Now, there are some opportunities. We've already talked about the emissions reduction plan this morning, and the allocation of funding to walking and cycling and public transport. We'll all have next year annual plan processes to identify potential investments. We'll have then the long-term plan and of course the next RLTP. So my view is that these scoping studies are timely because they provide an overview of how we could move forward, but it is really up to all of the partners now to work together to understand where the priorities lie and what should be funded. And if there are opportunities through the emissions reduction plan, then What we do have, at least, is some things that we could actually invest money on should it become available in the short term. So you'll see the recommendations in front of you. The proposed amendments are in red, just to make it clear that a lot more work needs to be undertaken to get the programme prioritised and funded, and therefore happy to talk through those recommendations or indeed any matters in the work that's been undertaken to date. Just to make it clear as well that so far scoping studies for Eastern Bay and Rotary River have been complete. The Western Bay study will be complete by the end of July.
And the PowerPoint, you don't feel you think there's sufficient information in what you've elaborated on for us to just. Okay, questions to James. Her Worship Mayor Chadwick.
Yes, thanks, James. And this has been a constructive approach, really has. And we were concerned about a costed implementation plan with very clear action plan attached. I don't know if you imply by a prioritised implementation plan in 2A, that's what it does include, costs and an action plan. But this is good work, and I will support the recommendation. Just answer that question, I think, for me, that implementation includes cost and action timeframes.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, that is definitely the case.
Great. Well, I'm happy to move from our perspective.
Okay, that's noted. Is Worship Mayor Webber?
Yeah, thank you. I just around point 3 and 4 in the recommendations, the Western Bay scoping study. How does this fit in with all the work that we've done under the TSP plan and AFTI and all that sort of thing? Is this additional to instead of? I'd like to know that a bit more, please.
So through the chair, this is strongly supportive of all the work that is being undertaken through the TSP, which is focusing primarily on infrastructure and also services. For example, through the public transport business case, TDM is intended to support all of that, not to replace it.
I suppose supplementary, it seems a bit of double up to me, and just wonder why we need to do it when it's being done elsewhere.
Any further questions or comments? There being none, it's been moved by Her Worship Mayor Chadwick. Is there a seconder? Seconder, Mayor Reestra. Any further discussion? There being none, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried, and they were the amended recommendations. Thank you so much. Moving over, everybody, to the New Zealand Freight Supply Chain Issues paper on page 207, item 7.5. And Matthew, we've got you there somewhere in a waiting room.
Yes, I'm here, Chair.
Everybody.
Yes, I'm here.
Before you start, Namuta, can you introduce? Yes, please. It's the first time he's presented to the committee. If you'd like to just introduce.
Tēnā koutou to the committee. I'd like to introduce Matthew Kilpatrick, who is one of our transport gurus sitting in James and Lorraine's team. So over to you, Matthew.
Thanks for that, Namuta. Kia ora, everyone. I'll share my screen now and speed through the presentation. Can everyone see my screen all right?
Not yet.
Let me know when it comes through. Is that coming through now?
No.
All right, I'll try again.
Especially from a guru.
There we go. Let's try that. Can you see that now?
Yes.
Awesome. Good stuff. All right. Yeah, so I prepared a submission on behalf of the RTC on the Ministry of Transport's Freight and Supply Chain Issues paper, which is currently out for consultation. I'll quickly speed through my presentation summarising that paper that I prepared. So today I'm seeking approval from the RTC to endorse my formal submission, or our formal submission. The Freight and Supply Chain Issues paper sets out a long-term 30-year plus view of how the New Zealand freight and supply chain system will prepare and manage the big issues that the system have faced. And those include climate change, population growth and densification, technology and digitalization, and international developments and uncertainties like COVID and Ukraine and so on. Submissions will be used to inform the development of a freight and supply chain strategy, and deadline for submission closes 3rd of June. I've included this map here from our RLTP, which outlines our region and our strategic freight network within that. Really important to recognise the role that our strategic freight network plays supporting our regional economy, and in particular the wider economies within the Golden Triangle. The Port of Tauranga is the key driver of freight activity and goods movement, and is the largest export port in New Zealand. And just in terms of our network, a regional strategic road network includes corridors including 29, Takatimu, Hulitz Road, and so on. Rail, we use our East Coast main trunk line, and for sea freight activity, the Port of Tauranga operates between Whangarei, Auckland, and other locations. General comments on the paper. I propose that we support the general direction. There is good alignment between the Western Bay of Plenty Transport System Plan and what is stated in the paper. And as you can see in this table here, there's good alignment between our regional land transport plan, transport objectives, and the areas of focus outlined in the paper. In terms of strategic context, there were 4 areas that were identified that were of significant importance to the Ministry of Transport. I've highlighted 2 that I think are quite important to the region. Those are climate change. So at the moment, the region is experiencing an average of 85 hours of road closures per year on our strategic freight network. Under our current RLTP, the target is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from land transport by 2030. And ultimately shift more freight from the road onto rail and by sea. Also population growth and densification. We all know the Bay of Plenty has grown considerably in the last decade. Annual traffic volumes in Tauranga have increased by 8%. And this is obviously playing an impact into the movement of freight and goods on these key roads. To manage this, good strategic planning will ensure freight movement is protected and balanced with wider uses. We're managing that through the TSP program and our RLTP. Key outcomes of the 4 key outcomes that were identified in the ministry's paper. I've identified 2 here that I think are of particular importance to the region. These are resilience. So resilience is a key challenge that we face. Resilience is transport objective 5 of our RLTP. And it's important that we manage this so that we can maintain access for economies and more isolated communities in the region. And just lastly, the Māori economy. So this was a key point under the equity and safety outcome. We need to ensure that economic interests are supported through the network for our Māori. We have a high proportion of Māori in Rotorua, Whakatane and Opotiki areas across the region. And we need to make sure that we can maintain access for these economic opportunities for Māori in the region. That's my presentation sped through. Are there any questions or comments from the committee?
Questions to Matthew? Oh, Dan, please. Yeah, thank you. Just a couple of comments. I just noticed on page 212, just your references there, you've drawn all your information from the 2020 annual report. You can get more updated information from the June 21 annual report. And there's just a couple of references there to coastal shipping. It's not as restrictive as the list you put there. There's coastal shipping and other ports around New Zealand. But I just think that the main comment was that the port's keen to see an emphasis on the productivity and innovation, specifically maintaining and enhancing strategic corridors and infrastructure networks. And that's probably stating the obvious, but that's where we want to see the focus. And I think the biggest thing that can occur to improve CO2 emissions and in the environmental space would be for the berth extension, the well-publicised berth extension to occur. That's going to allow bigger vessels to call. That will have the biggest impact on carbon on the carbon footprint in terms of the sea freight. But also it's going to allow us to introduce our automated stacking cranes, which will convert diesel straddle carriers to electric cranes. So there's some big things that will come out of that environmentally. It's not just about us driving efficiencies in the freight network. I've come up Councillor Nees, then His Worship Mayor Weber, then Angus, and then Deputy Mayor Isles. Councillor Nees.
Thank you. I just encourage staff to have an offline conversation with Dan about some of the key points with regard to the port, because the port's been subject to very, very many port studies and in the past. And I feel that this is quite a generic vanilla type submission, and there may be some specific points that might be worth being added into it.
Matthew, Dan's in the building today where this meeting is, and I know you're upstairs. You might just want to touch base with him before he leaves at the end of the meeting. So there's an invitation. Okay, Deputy Mayor Isles.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Matthew, for that presentation. Just a couple of concerns or references that we could possibly look at including would be with regards to route security and the increasing flow now of perishable goods through from Kotahi. Just bearing in mind, with the road closures and the impact that it can have on these goods in the event of those road closures. Also, is it worth noting at this early stage the construction of the Kotahi harbour facilities, which are going to be providing an opportunity to build more resilience into the systems by supporting coastal shipping. Again, an alternative mode of transport to dependency of route security via our roading network.
Matthew, did you want to comment?
Through the chair, happy to add some more specifics as per those comments into the submission.
Thank you, Matthew.
Angus, floor is yours.
Kia ora, Matthew, thank you for the presentation and a good submission as well. I've sent through some proposed texts, but just wanted to flag them for the benefit of the committee. So there's a good discussion there around the role of rail. We're moving 50% of inbound and outbound freight from Port of Tauranga, and I just thought that might be just the kicker point at the end of the first paragraph on 213, just to say that the RTC supports the continued investment through the Rail Network Investment Program. It's the sort of foundational bit, so let's state the obvious. In the second piece, and just supporting comments made by Dan there, this is the issues paper. There's not a lot to be disagreed with in the issues paper. It's the strategy next year that matters. The government has said that they will be taking a decision around the future of the ports of Auckland by the end of this parliamentary term, which means next year. So, I mean, we are making the point to the ministry that this strategy would be incomplete if they haven't given a clear direction of travel around the ports of Auckland. And, clearly for Port of Tauranga and other ports, having that sort of strategic certainty is quite important, but for the RTC it's especially important because it tells you about what your demand is going to be on your road network and your rail network and all of the rest of it, so you can get your investments lined up. So I would encourage the RTC just to note that that decision is due and that this is an opportunity for the government to communicate it.
Thanks, Angus. The staff have picked up some offline comments from you all with regards an amended resolution, so that's coming up shortly. So just working through these speakers is Worship Mayor Weber, then Her Worship Mayor Chadwick.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think you need to go back to your opening slide, which titles what we're talking about, which is a freight study, and our thoughts on that. And as normal, and you know how to push my buttons, we go straight to emissions. What we're talking about is the New Zealand economy, and David Spears will know what I'm about to go on about, because there was a meeting in Tauranga last night or yesterday afternoon. The Port of Tauranga is absolutely critical to New Zealand Inc. And if you think that freight movements in this part of the world are going to go down, you've got your head in the wrong place. And you need to understand, we're talking about a doubling in the kiwi fruit industry over the next 10 years. That is going to double the freight movements on road to get the empty bins out to the orchards, the full bins from the orchards back into town, the packaging materials from where they're manufactured into where the product is packed, where the product is packed out. You need to say that, unfortunately, in this part of the world, unless we want to become a banana republic, we need to understand that the Port of Tauranga is not going to see emissions reductions or freight reductions, whether that's by road or by rail, forever. Because unfortunately, what others have done to the Port of Auckland have forced the freight out of Auckland and now to Tauranga. And the impact of that is such that we need to understand resilience on those road and rail and coastal shipping networks are absolutely fundamental. And if you haven't got that in your first 10 paragraphs and you delete all emissions, then you're not focusing what you're supposed to be putting a submission on. Emissions are an outcome of what you do with everything else. You could reduce the emissions by refusing to allow any truck that's more than 5 years old on the road, any car that's more than 10 years old on the road. And when we become a banana republic or a place for the wealthy, let's focus on what the issue is. It's a freight study, and we are particularly affected because of the Port of Tauranga. And let's not be naive and jump to other stuff. Let's just focus on the real issue. Thank you.
The staff will make a comment shortly. Who worship Mayor Chadwick?
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. And yes, we do treasure the Port of Tauranga. I wondered too about a dotted line. I see lines between Taupo-Turangi. That's very important for us about freight and logs, but also to the freight hub in Waikato, the importance of keeping the rail line integrity. I don't know, that's a discussion, Matthew, that I think it would be good to have with Angus. It's just got to be there.
Noted.
Further comments around the table? Glenn.
Just a comment from a sustainability perspective in terms of the rail being so critical. I strongly support that. And I mean, I guess I've tried to look into some of the issues relating to the region, and I still can't get past the importance of the East Coast main trunk and potential for electrification. I know the Minister has signalled that's not on the cards until the 2030s, but in the context of government climate change policy and the need to go a lot further than the current ERP, I guess I can't see why that can't be raised as a key issue all the way through to Kawerau as a strategic investment that needs to be made sooner rather than later.
Okay, there's some redesigned recommendations about to appear up here that have picked up on some of the offline comments from some of the members. So here they are. And Namita, would you like to speak to them?
Yes,
and pick up on the regulars' comments too, please.
So through the chair, we note all of the comments that have been made and are suggesting the following in terms of updated resolutions to try and capture some of the discussion that's happened, to the direction that you're giving us. First is to note that the following amendments will need to be made to the submission in terms of really emphasising the importance of the port And I do note the conversation that's going to happen between Dan and staff shortly to work out the details there and to bring that emphasis through. We've got a number of changes suggested from Kiwi Rail, which will incorporate, including the linked rail network investment program. There was the comment in relation to route security and the impact on road safety and the link to the Kotahi harbour transformation, as well as the kawarau, and also Mayor Chadwick's comments too. So that's how we were proposing to capture the comments that are made, and we'll note that those amendments will need to be made to the submission.
Is Worship Mayor Webber then Mayor Reestra? Did you want to make a comment? Yes, so is Worship Mayor Webber then her Worship Mayor Reestra?
The electrification of the rail line, particularly its impact on the Kaimai tunnel, as to take diesel off that and convert it to electrification, is absolutely essential going forward. We should hear what the Minister says, but we also have a view that it should happen sooner rather than later. It's electrification of the rail function. Thank you.
There's a lot of heads nodding here in agreement with you that you can't see, Mayor Webber. We're picking up on that. Her Worship Mayor Reestra.
Yes, I just wanted another comment in response to Mayor Webber's comments about the economy is more important than emissions, is what I heard him saying. Actually, I believe that while we're doing all of what we're trying to do to combat the complications of climate change, we actually have to include whatever we can now around reducing emissions. And that, to me, means we need to be focusing more on a change of what the freight takers would look like. And it does mean electrification. It does mean getting rid of the old trucks. I think there has to be a balance. Even though they are almost antagonistic in their outcomes, there still needs to be a balance in what we're trying to achieve moving forward. And I think we need to be aspirational about how we're going to try and do that.
Mayor Webber and Angus, can you look at bullet point 2 in particular? Are you comfortable with
that? Yes. Obviously, we'll need to go through a lot of work around the electrification piece because, one consideration around it being the second decade is simply the ability to do the work. We're going through phase 1 of Papakura to Pukekohe for electrification, then it's getting it down to Te Rapa and then heading east. So, the timing element there's a practical piece.
And I agree with
Mayor Webber.
I agree with what Angus said. But what the point that I was trying to make is that we need to keep it in lights is absolutely critical, because I don't, on the hind tit of the giraffe is not a pleasant place.
Did you capture that in the minutes? Okay, frivolity to one side. Mayor Webber, does that capture all your concerns, those bullet points?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, are there any further speakers to the new recommendations? Mayor Campbell.
Chair, yeah, look, I agree with my mate, Gary Webber, of course, because he's always been very, very supportive of rail links from Kawarau to the port. I have to say that trying to do two at once may be a problem, and that's electrification. First thing is we want to get as much off the road onto rail and into the port. That's number one as far as we can see, and hopefully that some of the stuff that's going on in Kawarau in the next little while, and it's just a bit of a hold up at present because of landowners, Norski Scott. But yeah, I just would like to see rail just pushed to the fore as quickly as possible. The electrification will come in due course, I believe. But yeah, it's just getting your head around that. But, you know, taking those trucks off the road is going to be a big plus for us. Yeah, thank you.
This proves the point of having you with us, Angus. Anita, you've got another bullet point coming up there. Do you want to speak to it?
Yes, please, Tēnā koutou committee. I just thought in terms of an additional recommendation, given the timeframes that you delegate to the chair to sign off that final amended copy version of the submission for lodgement.
They're the speakers. Mayor Webber, you happy to move, Mayor Webber, and seconded her worship, Mayor Chadwick. There's no further discussion. I will put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. It's carried. We're very much on the home straight or on the back end of the giraffe or whatever it is that we're going to talk about. The draft regional public transport plan, somewhere there in a room is James.
Yes, good afternoon as it is now. So again, I will take this report as read, the purpose of which is really to ensure that the Regional Transport Committee is fully aware that the Regional Public Transport Plan draft will be going to the June meeting of the Bay of Plenty Regional Council Public Transport Committee for issuing to public consultation, which will take place in July. So I'm certainly happy to answer any questions about either the content, if I can, or the process.
Okay, questions to James? Glenn. Sorry.
Yeah, question, James, in terms of, I see, you know, the public consultation and so forth in there. I'm interested in terms of the practicalities of how that will feed through into different processes, and in particular, more for the Tauranga Western Bay area, with the pieces of work being done as part of the TSP. Mm-hmm. So often the sort of the public feedback on various regional plans seems to, you know, run into a sub-regional plan or strategy, which then means we're told, well, the response will come later. You know, it seems like there's a clearer pathway perhaps in other parts of the Bay, but for that, you know, how will this mesh in together where you have a Western Bay refresh, you have a blueprint kind of reanalysis, you have the TSP work and the business case specifically on the PT infrastructure and services, and yet the public consultation is limited, to my understanding, to the actual regional plan.
Yeah, that's right. Through the chair, the Regional Public Transport Plan sets the long-term vision and policies for public transport across the region in the next 10 years, and then it is for the various sub-regional partnerships, for example, the Transport System Plan, to take the work down to the next level and work out how those policies can be implemented through, for example, business cases, network refreshes, or whatever else it might be.
Okay, a supplementary, Glenn, go for it.
I guess what I'm trying to get to is if there is, for instance, strong public support for X in the regional plan, which would then normally lead to a process of implementation through a sub-regional strategy and local, you know, plans, then in this case, though, it seems quite a common occurrence that the specifics are not don't always flow through in the same way, because there is another significant piece of work which also has its own processes, and I'm just trying to figure out specifically how will those mesh together. So you might have X as the required outcome from a regional level, but you might have Y as the required outcome from a sub-regional business case. And I think that's, I mean, I won't go into examples because it might be a bit controversial, but I'm sure you can imagine some of the issues right now that we're dealing with, which where that is happening.
So through the chair, any business case that comes, for example, through the Transport System Plan will have a strategic case associated with it. And that particular section of the business case will be cognizant of all of the various policies that exist at a national, regional and local level. So that's really the opportunity for the business cases to reflect whatever policy is set out in the regional public transport plan. So as far as I'm concerned, there is plenty of opportunity for that consistency to be delivered through that process.
Okay, there doesn't appear to be any further speakers. There's some recommendations on page 219 of the agenda. I will move them. Seconded, Councillor Nees. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Just doing a quick look around. Glenn, anything at all that you'd like to bring to our attention as we close the meeting?
I think we've referred to the emissions reduction plan a bit today. To me, the key contextual issue that I'd like to raise for the committee is that there is a legal case happening with the Lawyers for Climate Action, the result of which hasn't been determined. But if you look at the wider context, what is in that plan is quite a significant shift. There's quite a broad scope to it. As Lorraine said, it encompasses all aspects of society, really. But in the international context, New Zealand is doing in that plan about a sixth of what is required to hit the sort of average for the world that's required by 2030, and about 1/8 of where we really should be to do what a developed country should be doing. So it seems like a big shift. It is a noticeable shift, but I think it's really important when no doubt there will be many people who will see the downsides of the investments that are required, and transport probably at the forefront of that. But I think the important thing from my perspective is that we are not even close to where we need to be if we follow international best practice, which is, you know, and the figure is about 1/8 of the way if we implement everything in that plan. So certainly I know there'll be all sorts of perspectives on it, but whatever they are, I think they need to be in that context.
Probably the only comment from me on page 132 around the Uputi district, and I know details are taken from our long-term plan, but our population is over 10,000 now, not a little under 9,000. Since 2020, we have gone up a huge amount, so just having that 10,000 is actually quite an important milestone to be recognised if we could have that. And yes, there's a lot have come in. Mostly because of COVID, it was 9,600 last year, and now it's over 10,000, 10,100 and something. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Yeah, Campbell and Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things that I would like to just ask David, please. Our 70k signs for State Highway 34 through Kawerau District. We've been asking for 3 years now, and the gentleman that asked for them in the first place, he's just got out of jail, so he'll be putting great things up there. I can see that. That aside, that and also we have a lane issue on our new roundabout, where I have an issue that we've made it into a 2-lane roundabout immediately, and we've got boy races and other races trying to race big trucks around it. It's only a matter of time. It's going to be a disaster there. So yeah, if you can just look into that for us, please. But other than that, what I've seen here today, Chair, is I can see Eastern Bay. We don't want to get left behind in the rush, and it's always a difficult thing for David to, as he said, I'm just listening to him, there's no more money. We've just got to try and spread it out and do it properly. And Pakatani Mayor Turner wants to call us all together in the Eastern Bay to sort of start looking at our strategies in that way. The other thing I'm also quite excited about what they're doing in Rotorua and in Tauranga about the driving thing. Amazingly enough, here we are trying to get kids on bikes. We all used to have bikes when we were young. That was the only form of transport, really, bikes or walking. And for too long now, we've been saying we don't want our kids to be biking to school, it's too dangerous. Now we're trying to put them on bikes so we can get them biking when we're our age, your age, my age. So it's a good initiative, but yeah, let's get as much of that done as we possibly can. The other thing that we really need to push, and I see Deputy Mayor Isles here, there's one thing that this is going back 9 years ago now, when Mayor Forbes and Mayor Bond and myself were pushing to have Kotahi 2 lanes. We were scorned because butchers and bakers and candlestick makers don't know how to build roads or bridges. And look what we've got now, an absolute bloody disaster. The road has fallen apart on top of that bridge. There is a whole lot of issue again, yes, and there's a whole lot of issues as far as route security go. So yeah, that's a real concern. And goodness sake, we really want to push this from the Eastern Bay, that there needs to be another bridge. And if we don't hurry up and do this, and we talked about this 10 years ago in Whakatane, when Colin Holmes was the mayor, and it sort of got scoffed off that, oh, don't worry about it, it's okay. Well, I'll tell you what, it is a real issue right now. And we don't want something that is going to be a toy. We want a real bridge into Kotahi, because that is a service centre for the Eastern Bay of Plenty. So that's my comment. The only other thing is I'm going to throw my deputy in there, because we do a bit of tag teaming in Kawa, as you know. And she does have a few issues on a couple of pages in our report. So I'm just going to open up to her if I can, please.
Through the chair, thank you. And before we lose James, I just see him fading a little bit there in his camera. We thought we might comment on item 7.4. There's about 89 pages worth in the Eastern Bay TDM scoping exercise. About nearly 50% of our agenda today, Chair. We welcome the return of Sue, who was the TDM, TPC, ABC, whatever acronym we use, specialist that came in. Of the 89 pages that covered the Eastern Bay, there was one line as part of the geographic scoping exercise around how the town was initially built to cater for pulp and paper. True fact. What it doesn't actually reflect is the movement of people in and out. It's just one line and 89 pages. So we welcome Sue's return and the inclusion of elected members in that process. I can read that back in January, Sue made contact with our staff member, who actually doesn't reside in our territorial authority area. So incredibly important that, I think, James, the statement that was made was the scoping exercise initially, and I appreciate we had more work to come, covered how people are travelling, but in terms of the impact that it has, we're really interested in why people travel. It's well known that people have been travelling into our Kawerau community from Rotorua, the Rangitaiki, Te Tepo or Pōtiki, and in reverse the other way around. We also have people who reside in Kawerau. That's not even getting started on the actual freight and truck movements and stuff, Chair. So we welcome the return of Sue and our inclusion. Thank you.
Well done. Dan. Yeah, I just wanted to thank those around the table and online for acknowledging and supporting the report and recognising the need to enhance those strategic freight corridors.
Yeah.
David, I think. Okay, Deputy Mayor Isles. Take home messages.
You've heard enough from me. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, just to reiterate, Mayor Campbell's concern over the Kotahi Bridge. Again, it's been well conversed, and every opportunity myself or Mayor Turner have, we bring the subject up with David Spears. So, yeah, route security, absolutely vital from Pōtiki and beyond through to the Port of Tauranga. So, yeah, we can't overemphasise the fact that it is certainly deteriorating, and that the surface repairs that have been done on it are not lasting or not standing up to the test. That's all from us. Thank you so much.
Good worship, Mayor Chadwick.
Oops. Yeah, Thank you. I brought up one issue on the circular economy about roading aggregate, but there is another new product with glass recycling where you can crush the glass and it comes out like a fine sand. And I think for many of us, it's not high level, but it is about the circular economy, and they're really good for paths. So there's a trial being done at Maruia, and they're finding it fantastic for pathways. So I think that's something that we ought to be looking at as well, the little things and the big things. I'm also pleased to hear about cheaper access for young kids to the driving licence, David. That's been something this committee's pushed through the Mayor's Task Force for Jobs. And while we do want kids on bikes, it's a bit hard in Reparo to bike in to get a job at McDonald's, and we don't have public transport. So we have always looked at, as mayors, that the driver's licence is a passport to a job and well-being for young kids. Yeah. And the more we can do together to make that affordable and safe, like the driver safety initiatives we've heard of, I think it's sort of a two-pronged approach. So that is good news. And I have to tell you, that's taken 9 years. So affordability for kids to get their licence, great thing. That's all from me. I'm enjoying you coming to council. That's where we sort of nut out our local issues, but I can assure my colleagues in the wider region, we do talk about connectivity too as really important.
Thank you, Your Worship. Is Worship Mayor Weber?
No, nothing from me, thank you.
Goodness.
Angus, apart from promising electrification today, what else can you promise us?
Oh, I got caught last time when Mayor Chadwick asked me to make an announcement on passenger rail, so I won't promise anything this time.
The back burner.
We won't limit it.
Yeah. No, nothing additional. I'm with you guys in August to give in sort of a summary on how the very first year of our rail network investment program's gone, and my hope and intention is to be there with you in person. So see you next time, and thank you.
It took a while to get you to the table, but it's proved incredibly invaluable. So no, it's really good to have you here. And finally, my colleague. Before I come to you, Councillor Nees, John Galbraith, you're hiding there somewhere.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the opportunity. Nothing too specific, thanks. I note that the TDM work is proceeding at that sort of local community, if you like, the campaign end, if you like, which is the low cost, I guess, input end. I do look forward to the further stages of when it starts to deal with opportunities to reduce heavy transport on roads, and I refer to Mayor Malcolm's comment about maybe some hold-ups on the container terminal of the landowner issues. But once those get through, then there are some big initiatives that can start to contribute to the wider TDM objectives. Thank you.
Thank you. And for anyone who is not aware, that's John Galbraith, our freight advisor. Councillor Nees.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, work continues on our transport network. We're very excited about some of the discussions that are happening in the Eastern Bay. And I particularly want to recognise the new trust that's been set up that Councillor Isles is involved in. I think there are some really exciting rural transport options that are now being looked at. So looking forward to working on that. Consultation continues on the Rotorua network refresh, and we're being pleasantly surprised that we're getting better communication back from that. The on-demand trial in Tauranga has been sent back to be rescoped. That is expected to come back to the PT committee in August and September. We have a bus decarbonisation feasibility study underway, which is looking at how we can transition to get our bus network to be zero emission. We did have a trial in our annual plan to trial converting a diesel bus to hydrogen, but that did not survive the submission process, so deliberations process. So that's off our books at present, but we're hopeful that the new funding coming through from the government will enable that that investigation and trial to go ahead through another funding source. We do have funding in our annual plan for a transport emissions reduction plan for the Bay of Plenty, so we're really looking forward to kicking on with that and using some of the learnings from the TDM work to help us in that. I guess most of you may be aware we've been experiencing some real social issues in our Tauranga network, which has been quite distressing both for the bus drivers and for many of our users on the network. It is a core group of young people. We were told yesterday that's roughly about 20, but they're using the free fares as a way of getting around the city and creating mayhem, and people are getting hurt. So as a result, council resolved to reduce the free trials for students or for children on our Tauranga network. They've actually been reduced to levels below what was being trialled in Rota in the Eastern Bay at present. So now the free fares for youth at Tauranga are only going to occur between 7 and 9 and 3 and 5 on school days as a circuit breaker to see if we can stop these young people riding around the network and freely and creating havoc. But there is proposed to be a wider task force approach where we pull all of the different agencies together to see if there's a better way to address this. So,
Councillor Lee said one of the presenters yesterday was the Chief Operating Officer for NZ Bus, and he said the antisocial behaviour was an Australian. He said it was the worst antisocial behaviour and criminal activity he had ever witnessed in his whole career, either in Australia or New Zealand. So lots occurring down in Willow Street. So that's brought us to the end of the meeting. I thank everyone who's zoomed in. You're going to miss out on a huge lavish lunch that was provided for you, but that's okay. No, thank you for being with us. Thank you to the staff who've been with us for their contribution, and in particular you, Amanda, for your sterling work behind the scenes, and also you, Namuta, and you've indicated that you're going to catch up with Dan over the lavish lunch and talk port matters with him. Okay, but thank you everyone for your attendance and enjoy the rest. Beg your pardon, Steve?
I'll go and have a crusket.
Good on.